from the commission that's joined us today, both in person and virtually. We'll start with a approval of minutes that was emailed out with the agenda. Do I have a motion to award that?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Brandon, you motions to approve the minutes with a second from Jason. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that passes unanimously.
Aye.
Thank you. And so the next item on the agenda is a new commissioner, and I think the swearing in part has already happened, correct? So the swearing in has happened, and now the swearing at can begin. So welcome to our newest commission member, Jerry Taylor from Garfield. Do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
I'm Jerry Taylor, Commissioner in Garfield County. I live in Escalante and I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for making the trek all the way there up north.
I was up for CIB this morning, so it was actually a good day to have this meeting.
Yeah. Well, welcome, and hopefully we'd certainly look forward to having you on the commission and hearing anything we have to say.
I appreciate it. I'm no Darren Bushman though, okay? His shoes are gonna be hard to fill.
Right. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item. I'll turn the time over to Jordan to cover the items on the strategic plan to talk about.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stanquist. Welcome, Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you.
Good to have you on board. We accepted to the game at like the last minute, right before we get the strategic plan finalized, but it's
good
getting
time.
close. And that's really the focus of today's meeting is we're kind of like cornering the last bend back. We've got about 400 meters to go and we are about done. So the focus of our meeting today is really just to give you an update on the last few deliverables that we have on the strategic planning process. And most importantly, to present to you the draft of what the strategic plan will look like and give you ample time to take that back, review it, and give us any comments or feedback that you might have. A couple of things that we have been working on kind of in the background over the past few months to wrap up on the strategic plan have been, let's see if I can share my screen. Have been the curation of our final version of the outdoor recreation asset database. I think many of you remember that we're on the commission from the beginning, a year and a half ago. One of our charges was to compile with all outdoor recreation assets across the state. Data that might be stewarded by different federal agencies, state agencies, as well as a lot of local municipal partners who manage outdoor recreation assets. And we use the fall workshops as an opportunity to gather input on data that we might not have had collected during the first few months of the project. If you remember, we presented those big maps to everybody at the fall workshop series and asked them to put sticky dots on where we might have data that was missing. And I'm happy to report that we now take all of that data and integrate it into a central location on ArcGIS that is now in the process of getting finalized with the Division of Outdoor Recreation for them to take ownership of that database and manage it and steward it long term. So this is kind of the web mapping application. If you can't see it now, the place where you can view all the data that we have totally collected, all the trailheads, trails, campgrounds, restroom facilities, so on and so forth, that we've been able to compile. So all of that is coming from a variety of different sources. One of the nice things that we've been able to build for the Division of Outdoor Recreation is the capacity of managing the database right now in ArcGIS Online to pull from other administrative data sources that exist out there in the public. So SITLA, for example, manages the land ownership database for the entire state. And so instead of us curating a database or pulling a static data set that might have existed a year ago, it's pulling directly from Sitla's authoritative data set. And the same thing for state parks, their official data set, as well as all of the data that's managed by AGRC right now. So a lot of data sets kind of pulling into one central location. And then the idea will be that the Division of Outdoor Recreation can then use that in their local planning efforts, or it can be referred to by the Outdoor Adventure Commission as you guys start to review projects and consider where projects that you're going to recommend to the state legislature are actually being located. You can see what else is already around, and also see some of that surrounding context. So just wanted to provide you an update with that. We're in the process of now finalizing that with the Division of Recreation. You should they have everything they need to steward that data set into the future.
And so then, and it's kind of timely, I was just having lunch with Alan Fuller, the executive director of the Department of Technology Services, and was telling him about this data set. And so I think as you hand that off, then it will then be managed as a state asset, and all those data feeds can keep it updated. But under the Division of Rec, but obviously you'll be working with the Division of Technology Services to help that out.
Yeah, we'll probably take a more prominent role in managing at least the recreation data set that's within EGRC.
Okay. Yeah, great. Very valuable.
Oh, and sorry, question, would that be? How are we gonna pull in data that's not managed by the state? That's the real question, right? Like, I know we're creating that now with what you have, but like keep it updated moving forward. Like if there is federal land agencies updating infrastructure, things like that.
Yeah, that's what it was implying for all of the data that we have now that's managed by a federal agency is pulling from their official data sets. So the Park Service layers,
Okay.
the Forest Service layers. So when the Washington office of the Forest Service updates their National Forest Service trail systems map,
Our database should
it'll
update.
be reflected in this data set. And that's, again, some of the value of using the central platform of ArcGIS, which the state uses fairly universally, allows us to do that. So, and even the federal partners, that's why they all hold all their data set as well.
As long as everything is getting updated by those partners.
Yeah, and they might not,
That's the hard part, right?
some of them might not be updated every year, every
Yeah,
couple
yeah.
years.
The rate of update is different for every partner, which
Yeah.
is the hard part.
Yeah, but it removes the onus of the GIS needs and the Division of Outdoor Recreation to go out
Yeah,
and check.
and data mine, all that
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Okay, the last report that you haven't heard anything about so far is our projections of outdoor recreation demand and projections of the need for different outdoor recreation related programs. I'm going to walk through some of our main highlights from this report. We're still in the process of pulling together the final formatted version of the report. There's a few loose ends that have pulled together from individual state agencies, like state parks, and the Division of Emergency Services, emergency management. They were working with to pull some data for some specific analysis. But I'm going to share some of the highlights that particularly relate to the major objectives and some of our findings that have been put to both the workshops as well as the previous reporting. So this is just in addition to the other 5 reports, the other 4 reports and the data set that are our formal deliverables for the project. So as I mentioned, this demand and fiscal analysis really looks at both visitation, where outdoor recreation is happening, where demand is likely to increase or decrease in the future. It also looks at where there's a mismatch between the supply of outdoor recreation assets on the ground and the demand for those assets. I'm going to kind of walk through some of our thinking and conceptualization of this relationship between supply and demand, and the idea that it can help you as a commission guide decisions or make decisions about where you're allocating monies, or at least making recommendations to the state legislature about these projects that are going to move forward or to be implemented moving forward. So I'm not going to talk really at all about the trends in outdoor recreation growth across the different agencies that we have reported in this report. We've broken it out by park service, vegetation, forest service, vegetation, state parks. We kind of all probably through ancillary channels, seeing a lot of the development trend in visitation to those different areas. Growth is generally consistent across the board, building predominantly or more consistently in urban areas relative to less urban areas of the state. But I'll focus really on this relationship between the supply of outdoor recreation assets, all those assets that we've been able to compile in our database, and the demand for outdoor recreation. So really the question that we're thinking about asking is, where is there a mismatch between supply and demand? Because you as stewards of the recommendations that go to the state legislature on where to invest monies in outdoor recreation assets can help balance out that equation. If there is more demand in a particular location, but there's not enough outdoor recreation assets on the ground, there are not enough trails, there are not enough trailheads and campgrounds. Those are great areas where you can start to say, well, we need to bolster the assets to actually meet demand. Or there's areas of the state where we have low visitation and we also have low assets, low concentration of assets. Those might be areas where you would want to make investments to spur some future demand. So we can kind of think about it like this. If you would think about the amount of outdoor recreation infrastructure that you have on the ground, the amount of infrastructure, campsites, trailheads, interpretation facilities, and all, that's that. If you can measure it in one specific indicator, one specific variable, you can put that on one dimension of an access. And if you also had a measure of demand, how many people are actually visiting that particular location? So this is the way that we try to conceptualize the analysis, thinking that it can provide you with some very specific guidance on where particular types of recreational assets are needed to be placed on the ground, or where particular grant applications might be particularly meeting a need across the state. So we can conceptualize it like this. It's a simple axis of infrastructure, the amount of infrastructure on the vertical portion of the axis and the amount of demand on the horizontal axis. Those areas that have not much infrastructure on the ground and that they're not experiencing much demand are areas where anything that you would do to make a recommendation to put infrastructure on the ground might actually spur visitation to that area. So kind of examples of recreation locations like that might come in mind. If anybody has areas where you manage part of what the resource area that you work with or that you oversee, there's a lot of areas across the state that fall within this category. There's very, very low use and almost no very little infrastructure. Areas that fall upon the second quadrant of having high demand but very low infrastructure are areas where you might want to invest in assets to meet that demand. So there's already people going to that location. There's not the assets in place to manage that visitation. So these are the areas where you might see people parking on roadsides. There's no parking spaces available. There's no restroom facilities for a lot of visitation that is actually happening. Another quadrant that you can think about here is areas where you have low demand, but you have a lot of infrastructure in place. Maybe the state legislature a couple of years ago or external partners decided to invest in outdoor recreation infrastructure that just hasn't gotten a lot of use. And these are areas where establishing and promoting outdoor recreation and tourism through those assets is something that would certainly be needed. So not something that would be able to be solved by investing in more infrastructure at the site that's already not being used, but maybe investing in marketing and promoting to get people to that destination.
Do you have an example of that? Do you think
There's
actually
actually
an example that I'm just curious.
there's actually very few. So this is the one that
Yeah,
I would mention
Is
across
that
the state.
represented by this?
There's not. So there's only 3 maps here because
Yeah.
we'll get into this.
Yeah, that was the one map that wasn't, so I'm like looking like, where could this be?
Yeah.
But-
So this is an area where there might be a project that's put in place that just hasn't gotten on the map yet. And so county DMOs or Office of Tourism might really see a need for investment.
Probably not.
Very, very uncommon. And that's why we didn't show it, right? Right.
Yeah, if anybody has an example, I'd, yeah, curious, because I'd like scratch my head, and I think, sounds like a place I wanna go. Right.
They're there, no one's telling you.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody wants to.
People know about it, aren't talking about it. so.
Beaver Mountain on a Tuesday morning.
Yeah,
When
exactly.
the canyon has been closed and you're the only one up there. And the last quadrant that we can conceptualize is areas where there's a lot of demand and there's also a lot of infrastructure. So these are areas where there's a need to actually start to think about building infrastructure that supports the existing infrastructure that's already in place and where that infrastructure might already be at capacity.
Well, yeah, I also think like those are the areas where we start as a commission, instead of making recommendations on investment, it's recommendations on people like policy changes, right? Where there may have to be limitations to how many people can, be in those places or something. I don't know as a commission if that's our place, but again, like having our finger on the pulse of what's happening, right? Like, I don't know. Those are places where we're like, can we invest our way out of this issue, or is this an issue that like a location is at capacity and we need to find other solutions other than investing in infrastructure?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lower left quadrant, right?
Yeah.
Places that do have opportunities, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, and you kind of see this particularly around a lot of the national parks,
Right.
The high visitation areas where there's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of millions and millions of dollars of going into those locations over the years. But oftentimes the ability to put more infrastructure in those locations is limited by the managing agency, and so maybe as a state you start to look at the fringes of those areas.
Right.
The other quadrants here where visitation is currently low, but there's not a lot of state assets in place.
Right.
A great example of this is you look at like the growth of visitation to Red Canyon Visitor Center outside of Bryce. That's an area where Bryce Canyon infrastructure within the park can't really grow, or it could, but it's very unlikely. But a lot of the visitation has now filled out to areas around the park, even though that's a Forest Service managed location. The same principle would apply if it was managed by Garfield County or a municipality outside the park. There's a lot of ability to capitalize on those areas where demand is high and infrastructure is kind of at its ceiling.
Yeah, it's the
It's
East
the East
Zion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, we're not gonna put more investment into Springdale. We're going to invest in how other people, how you can enjoy that area in a different way, right? Or from a different perspective where right.
So conceptually, maybe this makes sense. You can think about the areas where you recreate. There might be specific like boxes that you like to go to, ones that have maybe less use, more infrastructure on site, or less use and less infrastructure, depending upon what you're seeking out. But what we've tried to do in this analysis is really take the data that we have in the outdoor recreation asset database and pair it with visitation data that is statewide to see if we can provide you with some guidance on the groupings of these categories and where they actually fit on the ground. So the data that we have been using for measuring infrastructure, again, coming directly from the outdoor recreation asset database, number of campsites, number of RV dump stations, number of showers, restrooms, drinking fountains, trailheads, and parking lots. We found, and we tried this a variety of different ways, as best indicators of looking at the total concentration of infrastructure across the state. So we're trying to be fairly parsimonious in the variables that we're using, and that those are the 7 that were the most significant related to infrastructure, the concentration of infrastructure as a whole. So that we all realize that there's things that are missing there, but they might only be things that are very sparsely distributed across the state, like boat ramps or marinas and things like that. We have data on those things, but they're not really good indicators of the concentration of outdoor recreation infrastructure across the entire state.
Can I say something else? I mean, this is an obvious statement, so, you can measure that. Is there some way, there's like an obvious correlation, right? When I look at this map of like, let's just do it, like where there's been investment in basic road infrastructure, or, like there's probably a cutoff of a level of like road development versus undeveloped roads or very primitive roads that like make this corridor of heavily used or not used, right? So, I mean, obviously, again, that's like obvious, right? People can access it in the vehicle of their choice or whatever, and technically, you know, whatever, and that's part of this development. I know we're not like recommending roads as a commission, but also we have to like show that that's a infrastructure investment that then causes potential change in behavior of where people are recreating.
Yeah, it certainly is a catalyst for everybody else.
But again, we don't want to recommend, like, I don't want to recommend that we're using our budgets to, you know, improve a dirt road to access something, maybe, like, we want to pass that buck to UDOT as much as possible instead of using our funds. But at the same time, like, it does solve the problem if we want somebody, if we identify an area that's like, we build some infrastructure there. Yeah, the catalyst to that infrastructure is road development.
Yeah.
Or also the connection here of like, and you probably have data on this, or, you know, have worked on this, and it's like the percentage of people that like where recreation happens within miles of a certain developed road,
Yeah.
whether it's a highway or
It's
something.
it's shocking. So not related to the work that we're doing for you, but we did some work on visitation to the Mighty Five National Parks, and the average distance that a visitor gets from a established piece of infrastructure, a roadway, a restroom facility, or a visitor center is under 100 feet. You know, so they're not getting off trail very often. And that's just the average visitor. And you can really kind of imagine that, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not too surprising of a finding. And that's actually great to know from a resource management perspective, is you know, you're managing visitor experience. So
100 feet though, that's like,
it is a very small
Yeah.
location.
that is, I mean, I thought you were gonna say like a quarter mile.
It's,
but
it's surprisingly,
100 feet
it's
is almost
surprisingly,
unexpected.
surprisingly small. But maybe just highlights a lot of the opportunity for environmental education, interpretive facilities that are, you know, spatially concentrated. So
And again, the way that type back in, yeah, these are like slightly obvious comments. The way that type back up, and we're evaluating, you know, possible recommendations for infrastructure, we have to keep that kind of information in mind, or like these maps to be like, well, like it's not a if you build it, they will come. It's like if you build it and build the way for them to access it,
Yeah.
that they will come, right? Not the just if we put a great campground in a place out here covered in blue, doesn't mean that we're going to be able to drive people out there unless there's, yeah, maybe it's road infrastructure, maybe it's facilities, maybe it's, you know, along the whole way out there. So it's much different than just a single investment into, you know, get people to say, oh, we'll get people out in the West Desert if we build a campground out there.
yeah, I think that was also a common point of feedback that actually got integrated into the draft of the plan from the workshops. The importance of ACTA and the ACTA was universal. We had to provide more opportunities for people to actually get to the recreation settings that they want to get to.
Right.
With so much increased interest and participation in just dispersed camping activities, you know, just people just going out on land where they have access to along roads. I mean, that would be really hard to track where those uses are happening too, because it's happening outside of established infrastructure. They're specifically going to places that aren't necessarily campgrounds.
Right.
Right. So I don't know how we could reflect that in the data, because it's really hard to track that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Like you look at this, I was looking at this like down in his neck of the woods, right? Like a lot of blue down there on like the Aquarius Plateau, but we know there's a lot of people using that area, right?
Whole Rock Road,
Yeah.
during COVID, the whole road became a campsite. Really, people were just coming down, bringing their trailers, pulling off the road. So,
Yeah, just hard. It's hard to your point, like hard to track that kind of usage.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
You bring up a good question about how we're actually tracking the visitation. So in here, the demand measures that we're using is just photo sharing data from photo sharing application called Flickr. Many of you might have heard of it or have used it at some point. It's really one of the only data sets that is proven itself in the academic literature time and time again as being a very, very good predictor of the total number of visits to parks and protected areas and outdoor recreation destinations. It's great if we can have access to official visitation data that might be collected by the National Park Service or Forest Service or Utah State Parks. But there's a lot of agencies, counties that have no formal mechanism of quantifying how many people are using those areas. And so we look towards this data that basically gives us wall-to-wall coverage of where people are going, and shared social media actually does that.
That's actually a really good idea because there may not, people aren't necessarily going and paying a fee and checking in a campground, but they're taking a photo of that location that has GPS embedded in that photo, and that's great.
Yeah.
Great way to get around to that.
Yeah, we've generally tried to move toward using more and more diverse sets of data to actually quantify visitation. So it's not just how many people have purchased a ticket or how many B slips do you have in the register. It's B slips and the use of social media data and maybe data that might be provided by external providers. Some recent research I just saw recently, there's a paper that came out or some analysis that used like all the clicks on all trails, individual trails, to quantify visitation. So there's a lot of different confluence of data sets to get a representation of the relative use of a particular area. So it's not just relying on one particular source, many sources as we can. So
And I know that like All Trails has the ability to log, like record an actual,
Yeah, we have heat maps of where
Heat maps
everybody's
of-
wandering all over the world.
and the
right?
and the Strava data as well.
Strava
do
data,
that. I mean,
yeah.
that's-
Your
that's another-
data,
yeah.
cell phone information, I assume
Yeah, that's
they're
really good.
using that
Yep.
on here.
Yep.
But you find the photo clip, is that what it is?
well, this is the most cost efficient. When we're doing it for an area the size of the entire state, it's publicly available, it's free, it has a nice long handle history, goes back to about 2006. So it's been around for a while, and it's proven in the academic literature to be very, very consistent with official visitation records. So that always helps. So if we take this data and one statistical slide, just to show you one, we talked about sampling methods, I think at the last meeting for this survey. What we're trying to do in this analysis is basically take all of our measures of infrastructure and condense them into one variable, the concentration of outdoor recreation infrastructure at any specific location across the state, as well as the demand for outdoor recreation infrastructure at any one specific location. So we can do that statistically and combine all those 7 variables of infrastructure down into one specific measure. And both of those measures of demand, population density, and the social media data into one measure of demand. And then we can basically plot out every single place within the state on a graph, and it maps to that 2-dimensional framework that I just presented to you. And then we can basically classify outdoor recreation settings into one of those 4 quadrants.
So this XY plane is the 4 quadrants basically, is that?
It is, yeah. So it's if you take all those dimensions or all those variables and reduce them into one dimension, plot them in on one direction, one axis, and then plot the demand measures on the other axis, you basically get a scatter plot that you're able to separate those 4 quadrants out across the state. So we've done that, and this is the maps that I have shared in front of you. So these are the areas included that are areas where there's relatively low levels of demand, but also very low levels of infrastructure. So we put this together not with the idea of being very prescriptive to say this type of infrastructure needs to go here, but rather thinking that you as a commission might be getting proposals or will be reviewing proposals in the next several months to say, well, Garfield County wants to do this in this particular location. Is it to spur demand in this particular location? And if that's their motivation, if that's what they intend to do, it aligns with how visitation and infrastructure aligns across the state, mapped out across the state, and it's consistent with what what is actually needed in that particular area.
Um, since demand is kind of relative, how do you decide demand, right? Like demand on trails in the Wasatch Front are a lot different than demand on trails in Garfield County.
Yeah, and so it is on a regular normal scale for a concentration of photos in the share across the entire state. So it goes from 0 to 30,000 shared photos in any particular area. Those areas where you will get a lot of use, like the design corridor, potential Wasatch, it's that I think makes sense, exceptional amount, but it is on a continue. So it's really, you might see a lot of these areas where use is relatively low. I mean, use at Home Rock Road is a lot lower than the design corridor or the central Wasatch, but it's probably relatively high relative to other areas in the Tri-County region across southwestern.
So question on that. So if 100 people will go in today up to Cottonwood Canyon, a certain number of them are going to post something to Flickr. And if also a different 100 people go to Delicate Arch, certain number of them, certain percentage of them are going to post to Flickr. I imagine more in the Delicate Arch crowd. So you correct for that at all?
We do. So we only count for one visitor, each individual user. So if you have an account with the social media platform, you can post 1,000 photos of your trip, or your ski trip to Alta, right, or whatever it might be. But we only take that as one trip. So we're only randomly selecting. But we're trying to unbias the data for people who share a lot of photos.
I just make sure
That's the way that we do it.
people are more likely to use Flickr and to add to their account in a place that they maybe only get to visit once every 5 years versus
Yeah.
someplace they might go to 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah, that's a good debate.
Or it's iconic, like a national park
Yeah,
versus,
that's kind of the point.
versus the sagebrush out in the West Desert. They have camping out there, but they're not taking
Right, yeah.
photos because they're like,
Yeah.
That is a concern, but you'd be surprised. The data is fairly ubiquitous across the entire state. We do get
Okay.
really good coverage. So these are the areas where, if you see proposals or if you're looking at proposals or potential project ideas, where there's a partner looking to grow demand in that area. Again, kind of just conceptually map this out. This is a lot of the areas that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, might be county lands in fairly remote locations where there's not a lot of infrastructure in place. So southeastern portion of Utah, as well as a lot of the West Desert, falls within this category. The next quadrant is those areas where there is a lot of demand and not much infrastructure. And again, this is probably one of the more persistent quadrants, or where we see a lot of the recreation settings falling into. And there's a lot of areas where it's more proximate to urban areas. But again, as I mentioned briefly, one of the consistent trends that we see in visitation across the state is visitations grow more rapidly in urban areas or around urban areas relative to rural areas of the state. So that's why you see, if you can see on that map, area around Washington County, all of Washington County is getting a lot of demand, but has relatively less infrastructure.
Well, look at the development like of Western Davis and Weaver County, right? Like we know there's a lot of development going on out there, but
Yeah.
not a whole lot of recreation infrastructure. For
Yeah.
Sure.
Uinta Basin also shows notably there. And a lot of these maybe fringe areas around our national parks. It's kind of hard to say that have the national park boundaries highlighted here, but you'll see them in the next map fairly predominantly.
I am surprised. Look at the Logan area, which is Uinta Wasatch Cache National Forest, all that, high demand, low infrastructure. But the same, like Uinta Wasatch Cache down by in the central Wasatch, right? Like high demand, but no yellow. Like, so it has high, we're saying that has high infrastructure.
More infrastructure.
More infrastructure.
Yeah.
And just, anecdotally, right, like, I don't know, Logan Canyon and Mill Creek Canyon, infrastructure wise, seem similar to me, but maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, just pointing that out. I don't know what the answer is to that, but.
Interesting to compare these two maps to, and they're almost like mirror images, you know, like the Uinta Basin and, you know, Lloyd and in Washington County as well, and George. But it's the opposite on the map.
Yeah.
Which is just reflecting the difference being the demand.
Right.
And it's, the infrastructure we're talking about are like those 7, like drinking fountains, bathrooms, and crowd, right?
Trail, yeah.
Trail.
So it's, so recommendations, about based upon this analysis and these 2 quadrants. We're just getting proposals if you're looking at potential projects in anywhere, any capacity to fuel demand. You look at those that are highlighted in blue. If you're looking at areas where it's just individual counties or federal partners that are experiencing a lot of demand that don't have infrastructure in place. So there is, the orange would be sort of a higher priority.
All right, this is fascinating. This is why I have so many comments. This is like super fascinating. But so if we look at a map like this as a commission, do we think, all right, we're not going to recommend anything in Salt Lake County or Davis County because there's not a lot of yellow. Like they have the infrastructure needed for demand. But if we look at St. George, Vernal, Logan, right? Like what this map is telling us is it adds high use, low infrastructure. Those projects that are, I mean, is it safe to make that?
I think that's
Is
limited. That's just these 3 factors or other factors I think that we would consider.
Consider.
Public safety and a need there.
population
Economic,
growth?
economic factors, population growth. It's big, but I don't think it's everything.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think we can evaluate that a little bit. But if we were to flash this map up in front of a legislator, they'd be like, "No, we're not funding anything in Salt Lake. Look, they've got all the infrastructure, right? Nothing against legislators."
Yeah, or Salt Lake County legislature.
But that's what I'm saying. Like in a snapshot, you look at this. Like, I think that's part of the role of this commission is probably to like educate on all the different factors and not just be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, look, high use, no infrastructure. I want to fund a project in Vernal. Let's go."
Yeah.
Well,
Several months ago, I think it may have been like the one in-person meeting that I was able to attend in, I think like July. We were talking about how do we actually evaluate the proposals that come in. And I think that's a separate question. And these maps will inform that. But for example, if we're basically collecting proposals for projects, we should ask those projects to address these things. Like, how will your project help increase demand? Or how will your project help support the demand that's there or minimize the impact? And that's, I think maybe it's a really important conversation, but I think it's a separate conversation from what Jordan is presenting here. But these maps will be really, really useful in helping evaluate those things where we can say, okay, the data is showing that maybe there's this particular need or this particular circumstance in this area, but then we'll have to do some work to come up with whether it's a rubric or something like that, whatever criteria we use to. But I agree. I don't think we should make decisions based solely off of these maps because there are a lot of other factors to consider. But I think that's potentially a conversation for a future meeting.
And what type of recreation is happening, right? Because if this is based off of photos, right? Like, again, just looking at this, like you look at I-80 and the salt flats, like, we know a lot of people are going out there and taking a photo, but are they really like spending time recreating there? Or are they stopping on their drive west or their drive east? They're like, cool, here's salt flats, boom, photo, all good.
Yeah. This analysis really isn't meant to be prescriptive. I think you would say, like these areas are priority 1 or priority 2. It's just we provide the context and say, well, if a project's being proposed in this particular county or this particular geographic area, is it really going to meet the demand that's there, or is it going to spur demand if it's in a different location?
Yeah, you can almost automate as part of it, have a certain weight on the supply, demand, geographic features, and then apply all the other things.
All the other factors.
Yeah, including the quality and the viability of the plant.
Yeah.
That's another one, but yeah.
Hey, Jordan, can I just clarify a couple things? Is this derived from the photo clip?
It is.
Okay,
Yeah.
no other metrics?
For
Just,
measuring demand.
uh-huh,
Yeah, it is the photo sharing activity and also the population density of a 50-kilometer radius around a particular setting. So
I'm just for
it is for, yeah.
and then can you remind me, what are the 7 infrastructure? metrics?
restroom, drinking fountains, parking lots, what were all of those?
Yeah. RV dump stations or showers, restrooms, drinking fountains, trailheads, and parking lots.
I don't need this in here.
Yeah, it's not in this report, but it's the demand report. So the last one I'll just quickly highlight is the upper right-hand quadrant where there's a lot of infrastructure. And these are the areas where you might think of as the areas that are the hotspots for concentration areas. So a lot of our national parks in the central Wasatch are these areas. Also, a lot of the state parks, water-based state reservoir-based state parks are also within this category. So these are the areas where there's a lot of people visiting. There's also a lot of demand already there. So these are the areas where you might want to think about, well, what's on the borders of these areas to alleviate some of that demand. If you can already invest in infrastructure, or in the case of maybe state parks, there might be some capacity to continue to develop that infrastructure or develop supporting infrastructure outside and around state parks to alleviate some of the pressure within the parks. And so that would be the recommendation for looking at these more very basically concentrated locations where there's a lot of use and already a lot of infrastructure.
This is a fascinating map to look at. You just like see random red dots and you're like, what's out there? Like, what is that?
Yeah. Yeah, you can see like this is Bryce Canyon. This is Artisan Canyon.
Yeah.
This is the Central Wasatch, Tippin Otis, right? And Ohio State Park. Glen Gorge, right?
Like the little dot out east, southeast of Blanding.
This is Tennessee Canyon, right?
What is that? I don't know. I'm gonna have to go check it out.
Probably,
I was gonna say, when I look at these, I think it was more in terms of opportunities to go out and develop some of this stuff, like to maybe alleviate some of these concentrated red dots and spread them out a little bit, Yeah, and maybe some of that's very localized, the East Line project is a perfect example of that, to alleviate some pressure on the west side of the park, let's shift some of that over and, but even, Guna Basin, I think it's got lots of potential to develop. And I think that those are the kind of things where now we look regionally and saying, okay, how can we maybe work with the local, tourism and recreation groups to say, what can we do to help support this area to help build it out and do some investment to manage some of that and maybe shift some of that demand, spread it out a little bit more. That's what we're wanting to do.
Like look at the Uinta Mountain Range, right? Like obviously it follows the Clear Lake Highway, the whole south slope of the Uintas. Lots of opportunity potentially. There's no infrastructure.
Right.
I mean, there's infrastructure there, but we get people to use it.
Right.
That's the, if you build it, they will come
Yeah.
locations.
Yeah.
Stuff of Clear Lake Highway to,
Right.
other areas.
Yeah.
South Slope, reaching,
Yeah.
so maybe for context, hopefully they will guide in some way the review of the projects that you're considering, or to be used. To make prioritization of specific projects, or at least have potential proposers consider how they're using these things, how they fall in that particular area that their project is situated. All right. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk now about program projections. Those demand and fiscal analysis, as I mentioned, it's focused on participation projections, but also focuses on projections of state and after recreation related programs. I'm going to talk about one that we had continual discussions about in workshops, and that there's been a lot of interest in, and we've been able to dive into in a little bit more detail than some of the others. I should say state program, excuse me. And it's particularly the search and rescue support services that are provided across the state, primarily through the search and rescue financial assistance program. So after recreation related search and rescue events have increased notably in the past several years. This is the trend from 1999 to 2021. 2021 last year that we have full data for. These data are reported by county sheriff's offices. Every time that they had a training event or any time that they had a search and rescue event, they will log in to a database that's managed by the Department of Public Safety's Division of Emergency Management and report, well, were they training on, what were the number of volunteers that they had, the specific allocation. If there was a search event, did they have to hire an aircraft? Did they have to use OHVs? How many OHVs? How many hours did they have? And all of these are used for the division's reimbursement of costs from the search and rescue financial assistance program.
So this is training and
It is just search events, also not training events. And it's also just outdoor recreation related events. So we exclude a lot of the other reasons why search and rescue teams are used across the state. And so every time a county sheriff or a deputy goes in and makes a record for a search event, they'll record all kinds of data on that particular event. Who was saved? Was it successful or not? They will also.
So they know if it's in state, out of state.
They will know in-state, out-of-state residents. They will know. Local police for non-outdoor recreation events, suicides, for example, is another use of search and rescue that's not outdoor recreation.
children missing from their house.
Yeah, lot of people.
Parade, traffic control.
Yeah, so there's a lot of those events. And so we sifted through and looked at everything that's just an outdoor recreation event. And this is just it.
Do we have an idea of the rate? So it says events and reimbursable costs. So I'm guessing that's where you're pulling your data from, or you're pulling from every report? Like,
Every single event.
okay,
So
but there's some events that people don't probably get reimbursed for, right? Or don't submit.
Most don't. Yeah.
Most don't. They don't submit for reimbursement, like on a lot of these volunteer.
Right.
Search and rescue.
Yeah.
Teams, but
So-
we're counting every event, not just the ones that were like submitted for reimbursement.
Right.
Okay.
So it seems like there was a notable spike during COVID, but a real drop right before that,
Yeah, and I don't know what is going on with 2000 and
like 2018, something like that.
a lot
Yeah.
of low events that year. It's weird.
We're just
Maybe
really
that's
safe, really safe.
really
for
safe,
2018.
Exactly. Or maybe it's just an anomaly. in that. Maybe there was just, yeah,
Doesn't fit, doesn't.
Yeah.
Doesn't fit,
that doesn't fit.
doesn't look right.
There's some dates wrong or something.
I don't know, did you get hurt in 2018? No? Makes sense to me. That matches the data.
I like that with the ribs.
When was that? That was 2020, 2021.
Okay, so you're part of the spike.
Yeah, I was part of this fight.
Yeah, we've looked at,
I was
we looked at that,
lost.
the dates and they all seem accurate, so it might have just been, yeah, very, very low year, very unusual.
Or, yeah, misreporting or something like that. Potentially.
So a little bit more detail. Most counties see roughly 50-50 split in search and rescue victims between county residents and non-county residents.
It's not all the Californians.
Surprisingly,
Okay,
not.
really?
There's a lot of people in the Wasatch Front get lost too. Some notable exceptions though. Mr. Taylor, Garfield County, has more, you see that, non-county residents being saved than county residents.
So it's county residents.
County residents versus
And
non-county
is
residents.
it
Does it also differentiate out of state?
Yeah, and I'll show that next.
Okay.
Cause I'd be surprised, like on some of these counties, like I use Garfield, so forth, I think Garfield's a good example that I use because I think like in our community meeting, you were saying you have, like a population of 5,000, but 2.2 million visitors. I would be really surprised if those,
50/50
if it was
split.
50 split there, because there's such a wide disparity in visitors.
It's way out of, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We actually have somewhere between 5 and 7 million visitors. Some of them just traveling up and down the road. But we have a lot of visitors and we have a lot of them get hurt or lost.
And so if it's 50-50 in that county, that would be
Yeah.
odd.
Yeah,
Yeah,
those are the ones that do stick out to you there, Garfield County, Graham County. Again, these areas have a very low population base and a lot of visitors. Right?
And people a little surprising.
Salt Lake County, more residents than non-residents in Salt Lake County. And also Wasatch County, where you're seeing more non-residents. And I'm assuming that's,
Ski resort.
Wasatch County, most likely be Snowmobile.
So,
Yeah.
Wasatch.
With the strawberry reservoir.
Just to give you a trend there, county is kind of interesting to look at. And also in-state versus out-of-state. Here you see the in-state rescue events, and this is again just outdoor recreation related. The in-state is blue, and the out-of-state is the yellowish gold color.
What's happening to Willa with Yukons?
That's just where people go to do dumb stuff.
that's where the whole Wasatch Front goes
Right.
to. Just like shoot things
Having
and blow things
investigated
up.
wildfires.
Also Utah County, so what's your explanation for Utah County?
Same thing. So West Haven, Utah County.
They
So
go,
5 Mile Pass.
they go west of the lake to like,
Like Mount
West Mountain, West Mountain. Yep, a lot of that's where you go to do dumb
you don't tell
stuff.
me you haven't been invited to a bonfire out in the West Desert.
No, I
Where things have been
think
blown
it's
up.
Mountain Bee. Which is why I
No.
serve the local government to try and fix that. Kimball and Cache County, explain that one to me. What behaviors am I missing out from Aggies?
Young college
Yeah.
students, maybe.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah. What are your students getting up to? What are you teaching up there?
But, obviously Grand County, that makes a lot of sense.
Grand County makes sense. St. Pete, there's a lot of non-Utah residents going to St. Pete County for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Love St. Pete County. They're going to visit the government.
Well, why
Yeah,
did
why
they
they-
start
what'd they
going
go
after
there for?
2018?
But does that cover Skyline Drive? Is that?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Isn't there really good climbing in San?
Oh, that's true.
Maybe, yeah, it could
There's
be Maple
Maple
Canyon,
Canyon, yeah.
second homeowners, life says, yeah.
Yeah. But this is, yeah.
I like the, like Summit, right? Like
Yeah.
Utah residents, nothing but it's.
So not California, Laura, it's Vegas, huh?
Well, and like Washington County, they were pretty close, but then it diverged. And maybe that's just more people, more local Utah residents going down there.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Generally, the trend that we see in kind of our conclusions here is there's really no discernible difference between the growth in search and rescue events for Utahns versus non-Utah.
Right.
There are a couple of counties obviously that stand out in the non-local, non-state residents. They're driving that search and rescue demand, Grand and Garfield County primarily. But then other areas of the state where it seems the majority of the growth is driven by Utah residents. So
It's also interesting to just see the trend, like you just said, right? Like the counties that are having upward trends of incidents versus, Summit County that, hasn't had an increase in incidents, at least since this data, right? 2016 to 2020. Stayed flat.
and recommendations here, particularly in regards to how the search and rescue teams are funded or supported, knowing that there's really no general consistent trend in which counties are seeing the growth in search and rescue events, either from residents or non-residents. It raises questions of whether or not recent efforts to support search and rescue events, primarily through the transient room tax, are particularly warranted, given there's only a couple of counties that really see that major increase from non-residents. So there's a lot of really relatively rural counties in that can use a large portion of their transient room tax or can use some of their transient room tax to support search and rescue event. But that doesn't seem to be really driven by the data, and there's not a lot of demand for
Is
not
can you use PRT for search and rescue?
in fourth and fifth class counties, and a portion of it you can.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of discussion about using more PRP, and this data seems to say that it doesn't make sense.
Certainly not across the board. There might be.
And they're not talking just search and rescue, they're talking waste management, law enforcement.
Yeah.
This is just narrowed
Right.
on search and rescue,
Right.
right? And so it's one of a handful of things that have been identified as increased activity with outdoor rec.
Again, this just kind of shows the trend overall, that it's not just a growth in, I think, the demand for search and rescue in the fourth and fifth class counties is fairly consistent, with the exception of Salt Lake County, which is very consistent. So these are the costs that are actually reimbursed to the counties. And first thing you'll see that they're relatively marginal. Right now, we're working with the Division of Emergency Management to actually get an estimate of how much of a deficit there is between search and rescue related costs incurred by the counties and what's actually being really reimbursed by the search and rescue financial assistance program. To try to actually figure out what that difference is. But you'll see here that these numbers are really, really small. So they're only getting reimbursed for a very small proportion of those total search and rescue costs.
They're just not submitting,
Or it's not available.
It's not available, but the
so
fund
they're
is,
submitting
the
it, it's
fund is
underfunded.
expended every year based on what they have.
By February.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And
And there's some kids that look at that and don't even put in for it because
they realize
So it's not
fairly
like they're
marginal.
telling them they're able to submit.
So the inner policy recommendation here that's reflected in the strategic plan is that there's a need for a more universal solution to not only increasing the amount of support for search and rescue funding, but also diversify the sources of funding. And I'll talk about the ways that.
And probably lowering barriers for, increasing the funding, but lowering barriers for the sheriff's office to like do the reimbursement and get it, well, the more laborious it is, like you said,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's not worth it to get a $2,000 reimbursement if it's gonna take you
Yeah.
a week to get that work in, right? So-
Yeah, I was very, very surprised at how detailed the Division of Emergency Management, all the data that they collect on every single search and rescue event. It seems like they've done a great job of collecting that information, but it's a lot of information on every single event, particularly thinking that they ask the county sheriff's office to submit their requests for search events, for training events, as well as for equipment, all of their equipment purchases.
Yeah.
Equipment purchases are notably higher than search or training events.
And if you're a two-person sheriff's office,
Yeah.
dealing with the summer, they're like, I'm not gonna do all that, right?
So thinking about the way that this program is funded, this actually just shows the breakdown of how the program was funded in 2023. A total available for the Division of Emergency Management, $581,000 for all search and rescue events. So that was $581,000 that was available to be reimbursed to those counties for all 800 search and rescue events. So figure that out on a per search basis, it's pretty small.
So when you talk about reimburse, you're talking about reimbursing the counties that just the county themselves, county sheriff.
Right.
Right. Okay.
I mean, and again, that's where requests were made by the counties. There could be a whole lot more out there where they
Most
just
likely,
didn't
almost
even
certainly.
turn in a request,
Yeah.
right?
That's like $750 per rescue.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And so here's the breakdown of how the fund, or how the program, excuse me, is actually funded. To kind of see if we can identify, well, are there certain activities that are overpaying or underpaying into the fund relatively? And what you see here is that about a quarter of search and rescue support services through the financial assistance program are provided by a wildlife surcharge. I think it's a quarter. Every time that I purchase a fishing license or hunting license, a quarter goes into the search and rescue fund. And that generates a full 25% of what's available to then reimburse counties for the cost.
Do we have data on an average cost of a rescue?
That's what I mentioned. We're trying to work through that with the Division of Emergency Management now to figure out what the deficit is.
You know, if it's $2,000 a rescue on average and you have 200 rescues,
What
what
actually
like the base for this fund has to be.
Yeah, what I'd like to have for this, that particular analysis is to say, what's actually needed in this fund, in this program, besides $581,000 to make it whole, so every single county can get full reimbursement for all search and rescue. That's what we're looking for.
Almost everything is a sunk cost for search and rescue. The only thing that is gonna be a new cost is fuel and overtime wages for 1 or 2 deputies.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the team is basically volunteer.
Off-highway vehicle fund.
The road costs are, they have to bring in a helicopter.
Right, which that DPSR operations, that green one, that's what that is.
That's, okay.
So that's the
That's what
chunk
it
of the
is.
circle.
And it's going more and more to helicopter because it's easier, faster,
Yeah.
quicker to get in and out than it is to disperse a team
Yeah.
out there to try to find somebody.
And that's, the DPS doesn't pass those costs along to the counties.
Right.
So that's another thing that needs to be sort of parsed out is, okay, well, when did Star 8 go to Weaver County and did they go to whatever county? The other thing that's gonna probably shrink that is so many search and rescue teams bringing on drone programs. That's making it a lot less expensive to do aerial search.
Some of the things that might stick out here, the off-highway vehicle program, runs about 20%.
Sorry, can I ask a question on that, the drones? Is that something that we should think about?
We've granted.
I mean, but should we do more of that? If that really drives down the green
I don't
chunk?
call.
Yeah,
And-
we promote it. We encourage those search and rescue teams to get a drone program. Or like I said, we've granted several.
Is it somebody needing to
Is
go
there
to
a
a special
training?
training? Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to get a Part 107 license. It's fairly simple.
But the division has done that for years for the water rescues, right? Like they have the underwater drone essentially that the division has been using to help.
Yeah, so as far
Help
as,
cut costs on divers and safety and stuff like that. Like it's
Yeah.
been really helpful.
and yeah, so there's the division potentially, going to get into the business of aerial search and rescue. I think DPS would likely get into that realm more and more. And we have a drone program now, but
And I think it'd be like that, like transferring the water, same thing, like the DPS to take that over, because it would be more effective than just the boating program
yeah.
doing it in that case.
And with it being DPS's sole responsibility to do helicopter searches, I mean, Lifeline gets involved, AirNet gets involved, and so does Classic and some others, but they do the bulk of it when they're assisting search and rescue teams. What it will likely do is increase the cost a little bit to counties, because the counties they'll buy their own drone, but it's not, $350,000 or $500,000 for a helicopter. It's maybe 10 to 20.
Well, the maintenance and upkeep has got to be like, would you like some new batteries and spinning rotor things? I don't know.
Cross.
Whatever, you guys knew what I was talking about.
Absolutely. And yeah, it is. It's probably a way to shrink that green, but that's DPS's budget. That's, we'll help them save some money.
Other things that might be worth noting here, the recent efforts to bolster this program, use our card, and is the passage of legislation that allows people to voluntarily donate to search and rescue through the DMV, have both relatively only seen. They've seen some support, but it's only the marginal cost.
To me, those are opportunities for us to have a little bit more impact when.
So only
when you
$55,000.
register your car, there should be more promotion. The card, the consumer assistance card. There's definitely an opportunity there to get more.
Okay, so I think that our general takeaway is probably aligned with a lot of your intuition is just that there's certainly a need to increase and diversify the ways that this program is funded to support a lot of the burden that many counties are facing because of outdoor recreation. Whether or not there's a difference in activities and the growth of why search and rescue is needed. Here's the breakdown by activity type. And you basically see that most of the growth in outdoor recreation, the growth in search and rescue events is driven by people hiking and a marginal increase because of off-highway vehicle use. But everything else is fairly consistent year over year, going back 20 years now.
Is that probably because it's the most beginner friendly? So in other words, you have people who aren't very experienced, who can go hiking. It's pretty easy. For a long time with vehicle, but also those tend to have their own accidents, just like a car.
That might be the case. But I think that what this really points out and what we're trying to emphasize is that the activity-specific funding sources for the search and rescue assistance program most likely not going to be the ones that are matching up with why search and rescue is needed. So increasing reliance on the off-highway vehicle program or other funding sources like the wildlife surcharge
Doesn't align.
does not align with why search and rescue is actually needed. So again, the need for more universal solution as opposed to an activity by activity solution.
Yeah, hikers are not contributing to that prior graph much at all.
What is jumping?
Jumping
Base
out of
jumping.
planes.
Base jumping, skydiving,
Rope swings, like that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
That dip in 2018 and then the spike seems reflected on the hiking and then a little bit on the OHV graph too. So maybe that's where, yeah.
I don't see fishing up there, and I'd heard that was a group that does tend to.
some of those activities were not broken out, or there was only a few of those. So like water-based recreation activities is seeing motorized water-based or non-motorized water-based. So we group them into those general categories as opposed to like fishing. That's a big one. So there's two water-based ones, motorized and non-motorized. Again, the purpose of this analysis was really to see if there's an alignment between the ways that
Okay.
the program is funded now and the reasons why search and rescue efforts are needed.
Yeah, not surprising.
Not so serious.
This year, kind of new, but yeah, good data.
Okay, so kind of two divergent trends that came out, or two major trends that came out of that fiscal and demand analysis we really highlighted today. We're working through some of the details to finalize the actual report. We'll make sure that everybody on the commission has the version of the final report when we're able to share that over the next couple of weeks. But I want to move on to the next and maybe most important thing for today was just to present you with the draft version of the strategic plan. And you've all gotten a hard copy of that. I apologize for those of you online, but I will make sure that we send it out to the commission members that are online. And also, hopefully that gets published to the boards and commissions website, so it's available. But I'm not going to walk through the plan right now. What I wanted to do is just give you the draft in enough time. So in advance of our next meeting on October 31st, you can have a chance to read it, have a chance to provide us with any feedback or comments on where there might be issues or things that you have concerns about. But again, we've all kind of seen the content. We've walked through every single one of our recommendations, every single one of the findings, and laid them out in one of our meetings before. So hopefully nothing here is too surprising to you. So I'm not going to walk through it, but you do have the hard copy, and we'll also send out the digital copy. If you do have any comments or suggestions or edits moving forward, please do send them to me over the next 3 weeks or so, and we'll get them integrated into the final version of the final plan. So the plan is you'll provide us with any feedback or comments that you have on this draft. And then on the 31st, our entire team will be able to give you a full presentation on the entire plan itself. And that will be the conclusion of the strategic planning process. And then you can move on to actually starting to talk about prioritizing projects and how you want to move forward with that process.
So, we'll finalize on October 31st. And then will we take a pause? Or will we just move right into starting to execute?
So I think that as we wrap up the strategic plan, we need to get right into the prioritization of projects
or the venture fund, or the venture fund, yeah.
I guess, yeah, the question is, how are we gonna collect?
We're collecting, so we have a form. that-
What if I'm getting hit up? Like, what should I
Send
tell?
them to Patrick,
What should I tell people?
send them to Patrick.
Okay, okay.
He will get them
Okay,
an
so-
interest form.
If I'm getting questions of like, I want to be considered.
Yeah, which
Send it
I've got
Patrick.
one on the list.
Great.
Well,
Send
are
it to me
we-
about, so.
Okay, so ideas are already coming in, but we haven't officially said all ideas welcome, all right?
You know, we're,
Don't we have to publicly like
Yeah.
do something or no?
I don't,
we're not,
it's because it's not a formalized process yet, but take a minute.
I'd say yes. At some point, we want to put that form, an interest form in our grants and funding section of the website so that everybody can go and fill it out. So we're,
And I don't mean just for the, I think for the public, like, we don't need Joe Schmo or like, you know, somebody being like, I want a bike park in my backyard, right? I think, but we probably need to like county
Yeah, like
commissioners
county,
and mayors and things know about it. That's the
Yeah.
quote, like,
yeah, the
Yeah.
form's been in existence for what, 2 weeks? 3 weeks? Yeah. So, yeah, we're gonna plan.
okay.
So, yeah, we should probably at least make it available publicly,
Or give it to Brandy and she can
Yeah.
distribute it
yeah,
to
something
the
like that.
UAC or whatever, yeah.
Before we actually prioritize things, just because then
We want to get the kinks worked out at first, get a few submissions and see what we might need to add to for information. Yeah.
Yeah, and this year the timeline is so abbreviated that in subsequent years, we'll have a much more like robust stuff.
It can be shared with them, yeah.
That'd be great if Brandon, if you
But-
can share
send
that,
it to
and then Kate as well.
cities.
Town.
So can you send it out to, perhaps send it out to all of us after the meeting? Okay. okay.
I'm preparing a report right now for the interim, the natural resources, and so I'm happy to share that report as well. That'll kind of just give a little
Okay.
bit of walk
that'd be
through
great.
where we're at right now.
In November or October?
Although, no, excuse me,
Yeah,
October.
it-
October.
Yeah, November 1 was the deadline, but we were going to give it to them in advance of the October interim. Yeah. Probably made it available in October.
No, if you could, great, if we could share.
Just with our members.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, once we get that done, we'll definitely share it.
And then what's our timeline for deciding on this first phase?
This year, we were gonna try to pull President Stenquist aside after this meeting. I think ideally we would love, because some of these projects that we're talking about, are like multi-million dollar, like very large projects. You know, like I have an amazing one for like Pine View Reservoir, to like really do some amazing things, but you know, significant projects. And I was hoping, you know, come to the December meeting that we could invite some of these to present. We're still working it out, but this is like, yeah, it's a very budget one too. This is with how we use your time and their time. Because, you know, if we have 30 submissions, you can't sit here with, you know, 30 presentations worth.
Yeah, I don't think we should be a grant, like similar to grant
Yeah.
committee where we
Yeah.
evaluate, but it's like, I think the division should probably bring the recommended list to the commission in some way, and
Yeah.
maybe that's what we vote on as opposed to us sitting here and arguing over which project is
Yeah,
better.
Yeah.
we plan to bring an abbreviated prioritized plan to the OAC and then the OAC discuss maybe those top few.
Cool.
Within the initiative.
And then I think in subsequent years, much like the watershed restoration initiative, we'll have regional councils that can kind of do this prioritization for us and then kind of present those kind of final ones. You know, so it's a much more condensed
Yeah.
list coming from the regions.
So money could flow to the first group of projects by the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean,
Fiscal year,
assuming-
24 fiscal year.
Oh, the fiscal year. I didn't know if you were saying as early as December.
Yeah, I think that we would want to have the prioritized list approved by this commission ahead of the legislative session.
And then the session they'll appropriate to the project.
Right, because it is,
Forward
Oh,
that
but
priority.
then they have to do the formal appropriation.
Yeah.
the statute says the legislature.
Okay.
How, that's
So-
not clear, which, I mean,
That's Jeff, in my opinion.
figure out. Jeff is the legislature. Yeah, but maybe it's.
Yes.
So the legislature doesn't have to approve this.
I don't know that the statute says that this has to be
Uh-huh.
approved by the legislature, but I think that it would be probably good to present this
Yes. Yeah.
plan to maybe an interim committee or committee at some point. just to let them know that that was. completed.
So the legislative action this year will definitely be approval of the projects that we're recommending.
Yeah.
And then potentially, depending on how far we can get with it, some of the search and rescue ideas.
Yeah, that's in the works, or any other policy changes. I think the discussion about the regional councils, I don't know if that is something we could just implement, or if we would want a statute change to include that, so help facilitate that. That's what we could definitely look at.
Yeah, we're looking right at that. Yeah, that's coming up on our list of things to start moving on.
And first and second, if the appropriations act is made to the legislature in the general session, when does that money become dispersible? Is that like as soon as the session ends?
That would be the next fiscal year.
So it'd be July 1.
But we should try to.
But I mean, but there's money in the current fiscal year too that,
19 million.
right. So the question is,
Like there is money still in the.
You got your fund, yeah.
That
That
is not-
last
How
session.
much is it?
I think it's 19 million. Yeah.
good for natural resources? Is that?
I'm excited. It just says the legislature, so
Okay.
we've talked about that. I mean, yeah, you can see it going through natural resources, but you can also see it going through, economic development.
Yeah, if you go through Beal, if you go through IGG,
Or IGG, yeah.
yeah. So. Want to be consider how we want to direct that if possible.
That's probably topic for next meeting.
Yeah, for the next couple meetings. Sure. Okay, yeah, so that's basically, I think we still have, we're getting down to crunch time with just a few more meetings left this year and ahead of the legislative session. And so we've got, these two big things to get done. The strategic plan and the priority list. So I think this is really good. Appreciate the work that you've done, your team, so.
Yeah, this was awesome. All that data was
Yeah, it's
fascinating.
fascinating. So you're gonna send us digital versions of,
Yeah, and you can
Everything.
circulate that to your staff.
Yeah.
Okay, any other topics for us today? Well, if not, I'll take a final motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks for adjourn. Thanks, everyone.